Welcome to the Right to Reason, episode 25. I am your host, Robert Stanley. This is the big one, people. This is the best of episode. We have compiled your favorites that you told us about on the Right to Reason Facebook page and Twitter at Right to Reason 1. These are your favorites, and super cool thing to know here, all the clips from this episode have been or will be released to YouTube. If I haven't got around to it yet, I'll get to it this week. But everything, you can find it on YouTube, or you can find it at our website, therighttoreason.com, right underneath the videos tab. This is it, guys. We did 25 episodes. I'm so happy. Thank you so much to all of you for listening, and the subscribers out there, the Patreon supporters at patreon.com/right. I could not have done this without you. Let's get started.
And let me assure you that we are going to take our fight for economic justice, for social justice, for environmental sanity, for a world of peace.
And I think it should be religion treated with ridicule and hatred and contempt. And I claim that right.
The cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff.
You are about to get smacked in the face with awesomeness. I loved every one of these guests that you're about to hear again, because you've already heard them before, right? Because you're faithful, loyal fans that listen to every episode. I know you do. Matt Dillahunty talks logic. Interesting point here. The clip that you're about to hear when he's talking logic, almost 10,000 views already, so very popular clip. We'll get two Matt clips in here for you. We cover the famous Blake Giunta debate, Jerry DeWitt, Dan Barker. Aron Ra talks about them drugs. Hovind, the Kent Hovind debate got me in a little bit of trouble with you guys. Not everyone liked me talking to him, believe it or not. Yeah, Michael Shermer's going to talk free will. That one's awesome. Then after that, I'm going to let you guys hear something very special. Sneak preview from an episode hasn't even come out yet. It's a debate episode, all right, just to let you know. No one's heard this, all right? Reverse debate. Switching it up, okay? I am going to be taking the role of a Christian apologist and locking mics against Justin Schreiber. Going to be a lot of fun. We'll follow that up by discussing the flaws of my arguments with Hertzy Hertz from Minnesota Talk Radio. That episode, near future, but right now you'll be hearing the preview of that debate at the end of the show, so stay tuned for that. All right, you guys ready? Here we go.
Culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies.
We very naturally, as a cognitive and behavioral imperative, we form descriptions of the world, and we try to figure out what's going on.
If you base the design of rockets on science, they reach the moon. It works, bitches.
So those laws of identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, they are the foundation upon which all reason rests. They are also the foundation upon which mathematics rests. So like mathematics doesn't exist. It's an abstract concept that we apply over, like I'm holding up one finger, I'm holding up another finger, I'm now holding up two fingers. It's a way of quantifying, but like the number doesn't exist as something. It is something we attribute. The logical absolutes don't exist as like an entity or anything else. They are the foundation of truth. The curious thing, which will blow people's minds, is that as far as we can tell, the logical absolutes would be true even if nothing existed. Because nothing is nothing, nothing is not nothing, and everything is still either nothing or not nothing.
So something can be true even if itself doesn't exist. It can still be true.
So truth is that which conforms to reality. So whether or not something exists is I don't have a $500 bill in my wallet. That statement is true, and it's pointing to something extant and a wallet that is devoid of the $500 bill. But the way we can identify what is true is predicated on the logical absolutes of identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. If you don't have those things, you can't have any discussion. You don't have any math. You don't have any way to evaluate truth. You don't even get to say that That's the importance of something like the law of non-contradiction. Because if you get rid of that, then all of a sudden it seems to be the case that I could both exist and not exist simultaneously. And so all potential understanding of what's true just evaporates. And the problem is that they're looking for a reason why truth is true, essentially. And that's like saying, why is blue? Not ignoring the label. We invented the label blue, and it's different, it's azul and, Spanish, etc. But the concept that we have of what the color blue is, and you can have debates about whether you and I have the same concept of blue, but that's another thing. But whatever I point to that I identify as blue, to say, why is it blue? Well, what are we asking? We could say, oh, well, it's blue because it's reflecting this particular portion of the visible spectrum. But that's not what we're asking. What we're asking is, why is that particular portion of the visible spectrum something that we universally identify as blue? And the answer is that there's no why behind this. That's just what it is. We are pointing to something for what it is, identifying what it is, and then asking why it is what it is, as if it could be anything else. When they ask, why is there something rather than nothing? Well, I'm not aware of any nothing. Nothing can't exist. There's not like a place or a location or wherever. There's no nothing out there. You can't act upon nothing. You can't do anything with nothing. It's like, it may be the fact that it is impossible for there to be a nothing. I mean, that in itself is a contradiction.
Very proud to be joined by former President Barack Hussein Obama.
Hello,
Right to Reason,
and happy 25th
episode.
As you all know, when
Robert Stanley
sat down to write
the podcast
over 25
episodes
years ago, you probably didn't know that our idea would turn into the big national movement it's become. But thanks to your long hours, hard work, and dedication, you've changed the lives of millions
of listeners.
So thanks.
Right to Reason.
Congratulations on 25 extraordinary
episodes. Wow, that sounded totally legitimate. I am so happy about that. Thank you, former President Barack Obama. Thanks for coming on the show. The next person up that's going to congratulate me, it's going to shock you. It's pretty good stuff. Here we go. And now Senator Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, happy to have you on the show.
There is something profoundly wrong.
What?
When the top 1/10 of 1%
Oh, shit, you're doing that thing again, aren't you?
owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%.
Well, hold on. I appreciate that, Senator Sanders, but we're here to talk about how this is the 25th episode of the Right to Reason podcast, and I was hoping that you could say something about that, right?
And when 99% of all new income goes to the top 1%.
I get it. You're talking about important stuff. That's all cool, but we are here talking about how it's been 25 episodes and how awesome that is. What do you have to say about the show?
This grotesque level of inequality is immoral. It is bad economics. It is unsustainable.
Senator Bernie Sanders, thanks so much for being on the show, man.
This type of rigged economy is not what America is supposed to be about.
Bernie, stop. Just stop.
This has got to change. 1/10 of 1%.
All right, thank you, sir. Bernie Sanders, everybody. Thank you, Bernie.
The bottom 90%.
Dude, I swear, are you fucking with me, man?
It is bad economics.
All right, thanks, Bernie.
When the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%.
Hello, Robert. It's Sean Yankee, and I wanted to say congratulations on your 25th episode.
This is Andrew Torres. Congratulations on 25 episodes. Good job, buddy.
Anthony Magnabosco with Street Epistemology here, and I'm 90% confident that congratulations are in order for Robert and the Right to Reason podcast. Happy 25th. Happy 50th. Happy 75th. Happy 100th. Happy? Just be happy.
This is Gail Jordan with Recovering from Religion. Guys, congratulations on 25 episodes.
Robert, this is Russell Glasser, host of The Atheist Experience. Congratulations on making 25 episodes.
This is Jerry DeWitt, and I just wanted to say congratulations on 25 great episodes. Keep up the good work.
Here's our most popular debate with Blake Giunta.
Final question. Is God more like the invisible unicorn? Is God more like the particle? Or is God more like an external world? Which of those does God, what's the natural good starting place to hold your credence value?
I love how you used 3 different examples and tied them together. Very well done. And the moment of enlightenment that I got of seeing where you're coming from is you're basing belief on the scale of agnosticism in the middle, atheism on one end, theism on the other end, or let's not even use atheism, theism. We'll just say belief and complete non-belief, not sure in the middle. And I would say that scale is complete nonsense. But that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying your theory is nonsense. Actually, I love how you constructed it. I'm very impressed. But I'm just saying that scale that you're using, that's just not how it works as I understand it. However, to kind of jump ahead and say, okay, here is yet another hurdle that you're forcing me to jump over against my will, but I really am enjoying this, so let's keep doing it. You know, like I feel like you handed me a pill and said, don't worry about what it is, you're going to like it. I'm like, I trust you, Blake. Let me pop this pill. You know, I'm sure that's never happened to you. It's happened to me a couple times, and you wake up next to someone that you wish you didn't. But anyway, so here's what happens. It was Bill Cosby. So if I'm going to say God, my belief in God, which one is it closest to of these 3? You said pink unicorn, didn't you?
Yeah.
You kind of added to it.
The original idea is the invisible pink unicorn, but invisible and pink are a contradiction, so I just leave that out. Right now we're just dealing with the invisible unicorn.
Well, how can you tell it's not pink? It's invisible, Blake. No, I'm just kidding. All right, invisible pink unicorn, just pink unicorn. Quark being the smallest particle, and the third one was hard solipsism, right?
Yeah, the existence of an external world.
And what was our, just to help me out, what was our level of percentage on each of the 3?
I mean, for the likelihood of an invisible unicorn existing, for me at least, I mean, it might be different for you, but for me, I find myself assigning like a 0.000001 likelihood to such a thing existing. For the particle smaller than a quark, I'm at a 0.5. And for the external world, I'm at a 0.9999999. Very confident that it exists. And I say this, and I have no evidence for or against any of them.
And the third one with solipsism isn't with the assumption of solipsism. It's actually just saying whether or not you think there are other minds in this current reality.
Yeah. Do I think that there's an external world? Okay. And I think that the likelihood of an external world existing outside my mind, even though I have no evidence for or against, is 0.9999999, very high.
And which one would God be closest to? Boy, I feel like you're asking me like if there's an electric train going through the tunnel, where does the smoke come out? You know, or like a 1-story house and everything's blue, what color are the stairs? You know, it's almost, I don't want to characterize it as a trick question, but it's like, I don't know where God would fall. I guess just because the analogy of the unicorn, but seems to be the one that applies to God the best. I guess I could go unicorn route. Sure.
Yeah, I think, that wasn't necessarily me trying to learn about you. I already knew that was your position. The question is that the right way to think about it? So before
Blake, you knew the answer before you asked the question. That is sneaky. Anyway, I'm just kidding.
But when we're asking ourselves, you and I, as seekers of truth, does God exist? That first question, I think, should be, what is the prior probability of God's existence? I incidentally would make the case that God is closer to 0.5 starting out, and then people can accumulate evidence for or against the God hypothesis and get there as a result. I can tell you why I think God is around 0.5 or even higher.
Are you saying that we should start at 0.5?
Yeah. Sooner. Real quick, but I'm not gonna get into that now, because that would if you've seen my very first debate with Matt Dillahunty, I got into it, but it's that's at if you want to find it on YouTube, it's our Bible and Beer Consortium debate. Does God exist? The first debate, number 1, because we had 2 on that with the BBC. And
I
get
back that up. That was an awesome debate. And what's really cool about it, guys, is right at the end, they both just sit down and chat. And then I want to say, either after that debate or after your next debate, you guys actually just sat down on a couch for a while and chatted about some crazy stuff like how do we know there's anything outside the room, and how do we know if aliens exist. Like, it's really, anyway, anybody that isn't familiar with those, I totally agree with Blake. You got to check them out. They're fun to watch.
Yeah, but it would take forever for us to get into how do we get the right prior probability for God. What we can talk about very briefly and get some ideas out on the table with the time that we have left, and I'm not in any rush, so you can hold me here as long as you want, is we can talk about the second part of the equation, is what's the evidence for and against God.
Wait. You're saying we'll talk about the second part, but the first part would take too much time to get into.
Yeah, because the first part,
but you're making me jump again. And I understand what you're saying, like, dude, that is a long talk. But this seems to be a theme here. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. But at each step of the way, I'm going, I'm sorry, I really can't accept this basic premise. And you go, yeah, but if you accept it, let's move on. And now we're like going to step 2. And I'm like, I don't even accept step 1. I don't think we should start at point 5.
My hope was that you would agree that the particle that without any evidence for and against God, that you would sooner be at 0.5. If you don't accept that, then we'll just move on. And I'll try to see, because again, I'm trying to pick what in sales is called the path of least resistance. I want to persuade you, and I've got a time limit. If you grant me these couple premises here, then I can use those to persuade you. But you just told me you don't grant that particular premise, and now I have to make a decision. Okay, do I sit here spending the time trying to convince them of this premise, or do I just try to move on to something else that I can get?
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. This next clip is probably from my favorite interview I have ever had, Jerry DeWitt.
Are now, regardless of what we see on the news or on social media, we are now more civilized than we've ever been. So we can get better. But we won't get better by simply trying to generalize from whence the issue originates. By simply saying, well, it's a church thing, it's a state thing, it's a religious thing, it's a governmental thing, it's a people thing. It's a human thing. And that's the part of us that does change, but it changes very, very, very slowly. So it's going to demand a great deal of patience for all of us, because we're going to see very, very small changes within our lifetimes. But that doesn't mean that our energies are in vain. And it doesn't mean that our lives dedicated to activism is not worthwhile. It is worthwhile, even if the changes we see are small in the present tense.
You know, right when you said it's just people, I actually just closed my eyes. Like, that hit me, man. That really hit me. And it's almost like you used to do this for a living, affecting people's emotions. But I'm just damn glad that you're on our side, because you would be a devastating enemy on the other side.
Well, if you're going to let me preach, then let me have the altar call. All right. That may have sounded like the altar call, but that wasn't the altar call, because this is where I want to call people to action. And it may be something you never heard before, and it's what I said a couple of minutes ago that I've never talked about in regards to Amerigod. The only reason that we're actually in the middle of this culture war the way that we are is because these worshipers of Amerigod, and there are a lot of them. It looks like, as far as the evangelicals are concerned, it's about half of the country. The reason that this is still a battle that's going forward, and one that's not won or completely polarized beyond repair, is because at this point in time, the worshipers of Amerigod, many of the worshipers of Amerigod, are actually trapped in idolatry because they still remember the old God. They do remember. That's why it's hard for them to answer. They may still, in many cases, fall on Trump's side and excuse him for his behaviors, but you can see it in their eyes. You can hear it in how they answer the question about Trump's behavior. They still do have a certain heart for the old God that did at least have a better standard for living, a more humanistic standard. And so they're trapped in idolatry. At one moment, their pastor will preach a message that is a direct reflection of the old gods. And then, unfortunately, at the next moment, he may spin that message around for a political motivation and preach an Amerigod message. But both messages are being heard right now at the same time. So what we need to do, or at least maybe very particular members of your audience may be motivated to do, we need to call Christianity in particular out on its idolatry. Because right now, if we could just get them to step back to a more compassionate, a more humanistic stance than what they have now, that in itself would be progress. If we could remind them of the days when they were the anti-slavery voice. If we could remind them of the days when many of them, not all, obviously, this has been something that's been going on in our country for a very long time. Amerigod has just evolved to this point now. But that where they stood for women's rights, where they stood for charity, where they themselves, if we could call them out on their idolatry and remind them that there was a time in American history when they themselves were the welfare system. They were the ones that the poor and the downtrodden could depend upon. Then maybe we could burn the brush arbors of Amerigod down completely before it's too late.
I remember in your talk that you had referenced that there was no place in the inn for Mary when she was pregnant with allegedly Christ, and how that was analogous to the actual opposite of our refugee policy happening in America right now. And then another point you said that the story of the Good Samaritan completely destroys the racism that's just running rampant through our country right now, saying that this person was different. And the message of that story, that biblical message, that while obviously we know the Bible isn't true intrinsically, but it can still have some valuable messages to it, especially in parables and that sort of thing. And in that message, the whole idea was that one person didn't keep walking. One person said, I don't care about our differences. I'm still going to help that person. That hit me, man. If you feel the right to reason and the conversations we have on this podcast to be valuable, then please know that while this broadcast is provided to you for free, it is not free to produce. Please visit my Patreon page. It's easy to remember. It's patreon.com/right. There are multiple rewards available to all patrons, even those of you that contribute just $1. You can also find the link on my website at therighttoreason.com. If you are able to make this show possible, know that your support contributes to getting the message you care about out to those that may not have heard it. Those of you that are already helping, know that we are creating this production together. All my listeners are part of this show, but those that support it are facilitators that are turning our whisper into a resounding message in the marketplace of ideas. If you think this show is worth $1 or even more, visit patreon.com/right.
This is Russell Glasser from The Atheist Experience, and I'm standing up for your right to reason.
Thomas Westbrook here from Holy Kool-Aid, and you're listening to The Right to Reason.
Hey there, this is Damian Lee Four from the metal band Predator, a band that defends atheism, and you're listening to The Right to Reason.
And here's a fun one. Dan Barker from the Dan Barker Special, and he sues President Trump, and then comes on our show and tells us about it. Wow, this is a pretty ballsy maneuver. I'm really glad that you're doing. I'm glad somebody is speaking out against this stuff. What is a 501c3?
Well, a nonprofit is a 501c3 under the IRS tax code. The code 501 sub C sub 3 is nonprofit organizations like charities and educational groups and scientific groups and artistic groups, organizations that exist not for personal gain, not for profit. That's why it's called nonprofit. So a 501c4 is political. So, like, if you give money to the Freedom from Religion Foundation, let's say you decide to give a very generous donation to our group, you can write your taxes the year. You have to report that as income. You can deduct it. If you give money to a political candidate, somebody who's running for office, you can't do that. It's not a 501c3. You don't get a tax break in this country for donating to political purposes. So the bargain that is struck between our group and churches. Churches are also 501c3. That includes a huge category, a broad category of groups. The bargain we strike is that in order to have tax-free status so that you could write a check to our group and deduct it, we cannot engage in political activity. That's violating the law to do that. And the Johnson Amendment in the 1950s codified that. It was named after Lyndon B. Johnson. He was the senator then. It was actually Eisenhower who signed it. So that Johnson Amendment is telling pastors and priests they can't get up in the pulpit and endorse candidates and at the same time accept tax-free donations. So that's what churches want to do. And we say they can't do that. That's wrong. They could do that, but then give up their tax exemption, right? They could go ahead and do that, but then checks written to that church would not be deductible.
The first thing that comes to my mind is this going to be a way for churches to launder political activists' money, like dark money, through their books that they don't have to report to the IRS? Like, is this going to be some kind of like major corruption issue?
Well, it already is, even without the political. Churches are treated specially by the IRS. Our group, for example, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and every other 501c3 nonprofit in the country has to be accountable. We have to file this very huge, onerous 990 form, it's called, where every year we report every penny that comes in, where it comes from, every penny that it's spent and what it's spent on. You can go online right now and see our foundation's financial 990 forms. You can see my salary. It's out in the open. We're a nonprofit, so the public, we're accountable to the public. Churches don't have to do that. No church has to file the 990. And so we don't know where their money comes from or where it goes. Churches claim, well, it would be a violation of state-church separation for the church to be meddling in our private religious views. So you're right, it is a black hole already, even without political money. We don't know where the money's going.
This was one of my personal favorite moments. Aron Ra completely goes next level on the drug war.
You want to make America great again? Do exactly the opposite
of
what we've been doing for the last 20 years. And this goes for a whole lot of other things. I mean, I want to clarify, despite my appearance and what some people may judge, I never enjoyed marijuana. I've tried it a couple of times in my youth.
Just wasn't your thing?
Yeah, I just never got into it. And one of the real advantages to me is I think one of the very early times somebody had laced it with something. I don't know.
That turned you off to it. Had a bad
trip.
It
was so bad. mean, and this was before I had developed. Before I hadn't had enough to know any familiarity with what to expect.
Sure.
So, when I start seeing things like this, and I went, it was a really bad trip.
I had the same experience with shrooms. I tried them and just I don't remember what hellish visions I had, but I woke up on the ground and I passed out, and I have no interest in taking and I'll tell someone, oh no, I'm not concerned with shrooms at all. And they're like, but it's so much fun. I'm like, it is for you, and that's fine. You do your thing. I'm not interested. So I understand that.
So I have no interest in marijuana at all. However, I have to concede that when it was legalized in Colorado and in Utah and a number of other places, that they have the first places to legalize it were coming back with the results, and the results are stark. That not only have they made this massive revenue, that like in Oregon's case, they made so much money that they offer a tax-free day that their citizenry don't even have to pay taxes on anything.
Really?
Yes, on this particular day, because
that's so cool.
Just giving back some to the populace. And one of the other advantages was that people that have had issues that they couldn't get prescriptions for were able to deal with depression and other chronic diseases and such, so that their suicide rate went down. The crime rate went down. Right?
And auto accidents went down.
Well, yeah,
that's funny because you don't want to be driving under the influence, but they found out people are driving drunk. If they had an alternative, it might be somewhat safer.
Yeah, and for those of you who have never compared the two, when you're on alcohol and you drive 60 miles an hour or you're driving 90 miles an hour and you think you're going 60, but when you're stoned, you're driving 30 miles an hour and you think you're going 60.
I got ahead of you, and I got the joke a little before you dropped the punchline. That's funny. That's so true.
Yeah. So you're right. It is a lot less dangerous. But the thing is, what happens if the entire nation goes this way? Right? We legalize marijuana across the board in every state. What is the Mexican cartels going to do, or what is any of the Latin American cartels going to do? If you have an illicit drug market that depends on us, and now we're marketing it ourselves and we're making our own money on it, and they don't have a market anymore, so we've solved that crime problem.
Right.
And so the only way to win the war on drugs is just to stop fighting it.
Yes.
And there's another way to look at this that actually works better, and there was no reason ever to have made marijuana the illicit substance that it was made into to begin with. It seems to be completely contrived. And I say this as somebody who would not smoke marijuana if it was legal in every state.
Well, wasn't that Ron Paul's thing? As he said, why don't you legalize all the drugs? And even heroin? He's like, well, would you do heroin if it was legal? Well, no, of course I wouldn't. Okay.
Yeah.
So those that will
heroin
do it
is
will
legal,
still do it. Yeah.
I understand, and I never advocated for this myself, but I'd be curious about it, because I understand that somewhere, I think it was in the Netherlands, that they legalized heroin, and instead of treating it as a crime, now they're treating it as a illness. As chemical illness.
Sure.
So they're treating it. So we have so many people, and this is because of the private prison system and the corrupt government situation that we have, that people are being driven to jail in mass, and these prisons have capacities that they have to maintain. So people are not making parole; they're being unnecessarily convicted, so that we can keep up that profit. So this is what happens with runaway capitalism.
Absolutely.
So you can be all for capitalists. You can say that you are more capitalist than you are socialist if you are aware that at least everyone is both, right?
Sure.
And be more capitalist than you are socialist. But just understand that if you go far capitalist, where all you care about is profits, then you're putting people in prisons and you're enacting laws that are unjust.
That guy is the coolest person alive, I swear. Right after this clip, we're going to do the Kent Hovind debate right after this.
They hate you. They hate prosperity. They hate God. They hate children. And goddamn them there. We're going to find the lever to beat these people, and they're going to be beaten. Look at her sharp face. Have to look at her with that demon face. That's a frickin' demon. We're going to have President glare, people, and I'm not gonna go along with it.
We are not our past, and that's the whole power of logic and reason, is finding out that you can only exist in this present moment. The past is already done. The only thing that the past gives you is either the ability to blame yourself with regret and guilt and shame, or the ability to use the past as an arsenal to get done what you want to do. You have to ask yourself what you really want.
I want to give up.
Well, you're not giving up.
Hi, this is Kelly Clements from the Area Authors Project. Robert Stanley is my polar opposite, but we both have the right to reason.
No more should the Republicans ignore this growing threat. No more should the left be divided or take half measures. No racism, no white supremacy, no xenophobia, no bigotry, no Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA.
How am I supposed to talk to you people if we don't believe the same thing?
But don't you see, you've already taken the first step, the hardest step. You're listening.
This is Jason Camo from A Lost State of Mind, and you're listening to The Right to Reason.
Every farmer in the world, for all of human history, has counted on evolution not happening.
Right, but you haven't seen a wolf produce a chihuahua, but we accept that through all the series of different dog adaptations, whether it be natural or not, we've seen that chihuahuas can be developed from a wolf, but a wolf doesn't give birth to a chihuahua. I mean, in the same sense of a Spanish-speaking mother never gave birth to an English-speaking baby. You know what I mean? Like, that's not how progression occurs. That's not how evolution happens.
I think we could agree that the Chihuahua and the wolf are related. I think we have observed incredible variations in the dog gene code. There now are 339 recognized breeds of dogs in America at the American Kennel Association. Okay, from the Chihuahua to the Great Dane. If you want to expand that to the wolf, the coyote, maybe the fox even, I don't know, maybe the jackal. I don't know how far this goes. But I think that the Bible says they bring forth after their kind.
Kind is not a scientific term.
Neither is species. A horse and a zebra
species is definitely a scientific term used in biology.
A horse and a zebra are different species. They can still interbreed. You tell me exactly what the word species means, please.
If something can still interbreed,
okay,
it is not a different species.
Why are horse and zebra listed as different species that they can interbreed and produce a zorse?
I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just telling you the simple definition of species. If two things can't screw, then they're different species. It's that basic. It's a very simple definition. And I mean, it's even an easier definition than kind, which you would expect kind to be basic and simple, being that it's from the Bronze Age perhaps, but it's not. Like, what kind is a raccoon? What kind is that? Like, it doesn't really make sense for stuff. I mean, the Bible even contradicted itself in terms of whether a bat was a kind of bird when it's not. That's why we don't use the word kind in science, because it's just not sufficient to explain the divergence of life.
Okay. Are dark brown people and light brown people able to crossbreed and produce offspring that are viable?
Yes.
What they commonly call a black person and a white person. They can mate and produce babies, right?
Yes.
Can any of the humans that we recognize as humans, black, white, Chinese, whatever, can they crossbreed with apes, chimpanzees, orangutans, or monkeys and produce offspring?
No.
So are they a different kind?
Once again, the term kind, like if you're asking me to define kind, my best efforts would just be quoting Bible scriptures. And that's really not going to help us in dealing in science. And I think you would accept that. Like, we can't.
I don't accept it. Oh. The Bible says if they can bring forth, they are the same kind. A horse and a zebra can bring forth, and a 5-year-old kid knows a horse and a zebra are the same kind of animal, and the horse and a bat cannot bring forth. Neither Neither can a horse and a dog or a horse and a pine tree. So there are obviously different kinds of life on the planet, and every farmer for all of human history has counted on things breeding after their kind. You might get bigger corn or smaller corn or sweet corn or sour corn or popcorn, but it's corn. It doesn't turn into a pine tree or an acorn or a walnut or a cow.
But Kent, we're not talking about basic farmer stuff. I mean, if you were going to go get a vaccination against a flu vaccine, which has evolved to resist its last vaccination from less than a year ago, you're not going to ask a farmer what to put in that hypodermic needle. You're not going to ask somebody that wrote the Bible on animal skins what to put in that needle. You're going to want to ask somebody that knows about this stuff.
Let's assume that the flu vaccine, which I don't believe vaccine should be used at all, that's another topic.
Oh, I should have asked that one from the beginning. You're anti-vax?
Well, no, I'm pro-life. I'm pro-health. I don't think your doctor even knows what's in those needles he's putting into your arm. Ask him.
I missed the buck on that one. Okay, but we're gonna go down a pretty wild spiral, and our time's limited. So go ahead, and then I'll follow up with some other questions.
Okay, microevolution I think is a lousy term, but basically it means animals produce a wide variety of offspring. You may get a dog with long hair or short hair, long legs or short legs, straight tail or curly tail, but it's always a dog. And nature would select certain ones to survive based upon what happens. If you turn all the dogs in the world loose into Alaska, the thin-furred dogs would not survive. Only the thick-furred dogs would survive. Yeah. And after a couple of generations, you're going to have nothing left up there but the wolf or the, husky.
Yeah.
Okay, nature did not create the long hair on the dog. It selected the long hair to survive. But if you turned all those same dogs loose into the desert of Australia, now the thick fur is detrimental, and they're going to overheat and die, and so they don't get to produce the next generation. So pretty soon, after 4 or 5 generations, you have a whole population of dingoes with thin fur, long legs to get away from desert heat. Nature did not create that. It selected it. Natural selection is wonderful. It works fine.
You are nailing this 100%, Kent. I'm with you. Yes.
But it's still a dog, and it's only selecting something that was in the gene code.
But why would you assume that something could be in the gene code in relation to thickness of fur, but not in relation to other things that might start developing over time that could, reshape the animal in its entirety? Why is that like such a big stretch? If you can go this far with me, why can't you keep going?
Well, you just left science and went to religion. What we observe is exactly that. The farmer might get bigger cows. They've developed cows to give more milk or cows to give more beef. I agree. They have selected slices of the already existing gene code to get what they want to be the most profitable for their region. But they're still cow, and the further you get away from the norm, the more problems you have. Now you got to babysit the dumb cow. You turn him loose into the woods and he's going to die. Oh, it's same with the dogs. How long would the Chihuahuas last in the woods?
Not long. So, okay, and I would be satisfied in that because I'm not a big Chihuahua fan. You keep bringing up evolution as a religion, and I wanted to ask, and here's a tough hypothetical, okay? So bear with me, all right? If I said I could, if I had wings, then I could jump off the roof of my house and fly. We both know I don't have wings. It's a hypothetical question, okay? The point is to generate the next point of discussion, hypothetically. So if one day evolution could be shown to you, to your satisfaction that it's actually real and that it is true, would you still believe in God?
I guess you'd have to define what you mean by evolution. What everybody's observed is not what they use the term evolution for.
All right, and whatever definition is comfortable for you. Just if one day that dogs and horses are related biologically could be shown to you, to your satisfaction, that it's real, would you still believe in God regardless?
Well, you're talking about two living organisms. Getting from non-life to life is a giant jump that the evolutionist has to do.
Yeah, I know. It's a hypothetical, Kent. Like I'm not requiring a yes or no here. I'm just saying like I'm not trying to jump all over the place. I'm just saying like if evolution was true and you accepted it, would you still be a theist? Is that a fair question?
I would have to not accept it. I have to believe in it. Okay, it's capital B. It's a
all
belief.
Right.
It's a religion.
If you believed in evolution, would you still be a theist?
I do believe in evolution. I do believe dogs and wolves have a common ancestor, and I think microevolution happens. We have millions of examples for it.
Kent, you're killing me here. If you believed in macroevolution, would you still believe in God anyway? If it could be presented to you in a way that you would believe it, would you stop believing in God?
If it could be proven that there is no limit to these variations, that macroevolution actually happens, that would be a major step to discrediting the Bible.
Would you still believe the Bible?
No, that would be a step they would say, okay, I'm going to question this now. If someone could show me that macroevolution is a scientific fact, by that I mean, can you prove pine trees are related to bananas or to squirrels? Okay, they're obviously very different kinds. I don't know what the original kinds were, but I know there are probably, let's pick a number and say there are 8,000 kinds of animals in the world on land. This would not count the fish, because Noah didn't have to take fish on the ark. 8,000 kinds of animals. If it could be proven that all 8,000 kinds can come from one common ancestor, which is what evolution believes, then that would certainly discredit the biblical teaching that they bring forth after their kind. But this is one of those, if cows could jump over the moon, would you believe, in gravity? Well, come on, this is a dumb line of thought. No, we don't observe. Nobody's ever observed any animal produce anything other than what is obviously, to a 5-year-old, the same kind of offspring.
This is fascinating to me. I did not, I will honestly say that I appreciate your answer. I did not expect you to say that this would, I don't think you actually, I don't want to misquote you here, but I don't think you actually said you would stop believing in God, you stop being a Christian, but you did say that it would cause you to seriously doubt the Bible's validity. And I did not see that one coming. That was a sidewinder for me. But if that's the case, it seems to me like I mischaracterized you, Kent. I was thinking of your belief in creationism as being more or less a derivative of your faith.
No, my creation is a derivative of my science. I observe squirrels produce squirrels, and there may be black squirrels or white squirrels or gray squirrels or kaibab squirrels, but that's all we observe. You show me any squirrel produce a non-squirrel, or any dog produce a non-dog. But the evolutionist does believe and does teach in the textbooks that dogs came from something non-dog. They ultimately teach that dogs came from a rock. That is exactly what the textbooks teach, and I've got them in front of me if you want to hear the quotes. That the rocks dissolved in the rain 4.6 billion years ago as the earth cooled down, and it got concentrated into little puddles through evaporation, and these the minerals from the rocks formed into cells and came alive. And that single cell became multi-celled, and the multi-cell became, even bigger. And ultimately, elephants and bananas have a common ancestor, and it was a rock. That is exactly what the textbook says.
That's not what I say. That is not what any textbook I've read, other than the ones from whenever I was going to Christian school. That's what they said evolution was. But once I actually took college biology, it did not say that. No, it did not say that any, what would you say, fish comes from rocks or anything? No, that's not what...
Public textbooks. I've got them in front of me if you want to go down that road. We've gone way over time here. But you need to watch my video number 1 or number 4 of my series on drdino.com, and I show all this. This is what they teach. And I say, guys, you are welcome to believe that. I don't care what you believe. But you're spreading a religion at taxpayer expense. This is wrong. Go fund your own school and have your own religion and teach whatever you want. I don't care what they teach. But they're demanding that all of us pay for their religion to be taught, and I resent that.
I'll give you this much. If I believed evolution to be what you believe evolution to be, I would not believe evolution either. And I think that's at least honest from your perspective. You shouldn't believe that. That's crazy talk. And if that was my concept of evolution, I would reject it as well. And to follow that up, you really threw a sidewinder there, and the conversation just got interesting, and I hate to call it right then, but your basis of belief in God, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't faith-based?
I think it's observation. If you walk through the woods and found a painting hanging on a tree, and you look around, there are no footprints, there are no people, you holler, hey, anybody here? Nobody answers.
Yeah, it'd have a painter, sure.
You would believe in a painter. Is that faith-based or observation-based?
Observation, absolutely.
Sure. You're walking through the woods and you find a building. Nobody there, nobody around, no footprints, no evidence.
Builder observation. I'm with you 100%.
Okay, I look at creation and say there had to be a creator.
Well, you're calling it creation, though.
That doesn't. I look at a flea, incredibly tiny, has all the systems that you have, can eat, sleep, reproduce, hear, smell, taste, and fly. More complicated than humans, in a whole lot less space. Do you think that evolved by chance, or was that designed? What would the observation tell somebody with half a brain and one eye?
What your question would tell me is that you're presenting a false dichotomy. That's a logical fallacy. You said, was it designed or was it just chaos? I don't know that like being random or coming from God are the only two options available. And even if those were the only two options available, that wouldn't mean that you'd have to accept either one. I mean, that's just basic logic.
Right. Both options may be wrong. I understand how that works, okay?
So I thought I'd throw another Matt clip in here, Matt Dillahunty. I'm throwing common Christian apologist arguments at him, and we get to the Kalam cosmological argument, and his answer is just genius and very concise. Here it is. Kalam cosmological argument. Here it comes. Get ready, because you're about to get stumped, Dillahunty.
Okay.
You got nothing on this. All right. So everything that and stop me if I say something you disagree with. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist.
I stop you there?
I only got to the second one.
Yeah. Well, I was stopping you after the first one.
What do you got?
Well, this idea: everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. Prove it.
No, that's just if I can put on the Christian hat for a minute. Matt, that's just our obvious way of understanding the universe. Everything's cause and effect. If you do something, there is an effect that was caused by what you did.
Sure, that's a demonstration that we can identify causality, and that so far as we can tell, every effect is the result of the cause. But that doesn't mean that everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence that's external. I mean, so...
Name one thing that doesn't have a cause.
So that's a fallacy as well. See, so first of all, this is the black swan fallacy of X is true because we haven't, or basically an argument from ignorance is that X is true because you can't prove that it's false. But let's look at the actual argument. The cosmological arguments used to begin with everything has a cause for its existence. And then people would say, well, then God must have a cause for its existence. And you would want to change the first premise to everything except for God has a cause for its existence, except that results in special pleading, where the very thing that you're trying to demonstrate, that there is an uncaused God, is something you just assert in the first premise. So in order to disguise that, they say everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. And, as Dan Barker's pointed out, that divides the universe, that divides reality into two categories. Things that began to exist and things that did not begin to exist. We have I can point to nothing that fits that second category. Nothing. I'm not aware of anything that did not begin to exist. It may be the case.
Wait. What are the two categories again?
Things that began to exist and things that did not begin to exist. So that second category of things that did not begin to exist. First of all, it can't be an empty set. It can't be, there has to be something in that set. Otherwise it's irrelevant. Why would you talk about an empty set? The other thing is, God can't be the only thing that's in that empty set. Otherwise, things that did not begin to exist is synonymous with God, which makes the first premise of the argument become all things except God have a cause, which makes it ultimately circular in that case.
Is it fair to call that devil's advocate if I'm being on Jesus' side whenever I'm trying to argue the point? I don't know if that term applies to Jesus' advocate. I don't know. But playing devil's advocate, if...
Well, the thing is, and I'll let you play devil's advocate, but the thing for clarity is this. The argument's now dead. An argument with a premise that is flawed is useless. Because if the premise is flawed, nothing about the argument can lead you to any conclusion. An argument in structure is valid if true premises lead to true conclusions. But when we're assessing the soundness of something, if there's a flaw in a premise, your argument is demolished. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that there's no point in continuing with the argument.
Michael Shermer on free will. I don't know a better way to ask the question than just to blatantly ask, do we have free will?
Absolutely we do, and I have no choice but to accept that belief.
That's not fair, Mike.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm a compatibilist. There's different positions on this. The three basic positions are libertarian free will, not political libertarian, but what philosophers call libertarian free will, where you absolutely have total free will. And almost no philosophers believe that. Then there's very few. Then there's, determinism, just, every last twitch and thought and itch and laugh and everything we do is determined in the same way that a billiard ball, careening around a table is determined. And then there's compatibilists, which hold that we do live in a determined universe where every effect has a cause and so on, all the way back to the Big Bang. But the choices we make are part of the causal net are still our choices. So the part of the problem is there's no good way to work around this because of the limitations of language and cognition. So when a compatibilist says I make choices, this is what I would argue and I'm pretty much reflecting Dan Dennett's much more thought out position that he wrote in his book Freedom Evolves, that we have degrees of freedom. That is, let's say I have more degrees of freedom than a chimp. A chimp has more than my dog, the dog more than the rat more than the cockroach, and so on. It has to do with behavioral complexity and the number of options you have at any given point when you're, say, just walking along, go left, right, 2 degrees to the center or whatever. That there's more degrees of freedom for more complex organisms, and we're the most complex, so we have the most degrees of freedom. Now, all those things are still caused. There's still quantum effects and Newtonian mechanics at work and biology and genetics and all that. But still, the difference between, say, me and a drug addict has fewer degrees of freedom than I do because I'm not addicted to drugs. And so my behavioral repertoire is broader, wider. I have more choices I can make. And so in that sense, and also it's my brain, so it's me responsible for the choices I make because it's me making those choices, my brain, and the brain is a whole series of neural networks or modules. There's no self, but there's, part of my brain is overriding my impulses. Say I have an impulse to eat chocolate cake, but I have another part of my brain that says, no, Shermer, come on, you're trying to lose weight. Okay, all right. If I can get through the next hour and not have that chocolate cake, I'll be okay. And then I impose certain things I've learned in my life to control my behavior so I don't eat the chocolate cake. And so I can override my impulses. This is called free won't. And so there I think there's reasonable arguments to be made for compatibilism. And in any case, we feel like we have free will. We're very hypocritical about this. You feel like you have free will, but that I don't. And you treat me as if I'm a deterministic agent in the world, and I do the same thing. I feel like I'm free, but I treat other people in the world as if it's determined, and we all do this. So this is what the philosopher Hans Weiner called a useful fiction. It's a useful fiction to just assume we have free will because it feels like it. We are making choices, real choices that you can override in the world. And in any case, to have a civil society, we need to hold people accountable. And finally, I think psychology and law have merged pretty well on these issues of allocating punishment in a Skinnerian behavioral adjustment way that we're trying to get people to change their behavior in a kind of a game matrix, like, let's say we're going to allocate certain punishments for certain behaviors. So like we have first degree murder, second degree murder, and so on. We make distinctions for people in crimes of passion or crimes of rage versus plotted out and intentional murder, or say the guy had a brain tumor. And so he couldn't control his rage, or that there's certain people with brain damage, like Adrian Rain's book, The Anatomy of Violence. And I think that's what it's called, The Anatomy of Violence. He's the guy that scanned the brains of serial killers and found out that their prefrontal cortex is pretty shut down, pretty quiescent, largely non-functioning. So everybody has impulses that bubble up from underneath. And now most of us don't have impulses to just walk around killing people. But these people that when you look at their backgrounds, they have horrible backgrounds and they've been, banged on the head, they have brain damage and so on. And the equivalent of a tumor, their prefrontal cortex that controls their urges is just not working. So don't let these people out, for God's sakes. But treat them in a way that it's more of a mechanical problem. Well, you and I don't have that problem. Our prefrontal cortex works pretty well, so you and I should be held accountable for not controlling our impulses as opposed to somebody else who can't control them. Still, don't let them out, lock them up, because we don't want them to cause mayhem to society. But instead of punishing them in a way like a theological system of issuing punishments for sin, we should treat them as it's a behavioral problem that needs to be solved. So that's my take on that.
You said so much there, and I have no doubt that the listeners, even before I'm talking now, have already hit rewind to play a lot of that back, because that was a lot of information really fast, and I'm gonna have to join them in that. I got to play a lot of that back myself later. On my end, I got focused on one thing that you just said, and I was hoping you could clarify. Did you just say there is no self?
Yeah, well, this is actually a big subject in both philosophy and now cognitive science, that the brain consists of a whole bunch of modules or neural networks, whatever metaphor you want to use, that evolved to solve certain problems. And it's not clear where the self is. We feel like a self. It may be something of an illusion, but it's a really good illusion if it is, because it certainly feels like I'm a self contained in a single body. I don't go so far as some people. Bruce Hood wrote a book, I think it was called The Illusion of the Self, in which he made this argument. And that's the argument. I don't go that far, but there's the idea that, like, where would free will be located? Well, it's not located in any one place. Well, where's the self? There is no self module in the brain. It's probably just the coordination of all neural networks at once. Michael Gazzaniga, the neuroscientist here at UC Santa Barbara, I'm up in Santa Barbara now, he talks about the left hemisphere interpreter. That is, there's a portion of your brain, your left cortex, that coordinates all the others into kind of a coherent narrative story that makes sense. Even though it's mostly just random firings and the brain's just doing whatever it's doing, but there's a part of your brain that coordinates it all to make sense. And so this is why we spin doctor things after the fact, the hindsight bias, for example. It's like, oh, that makes perfect sense the way it happened. Well, it really didn't, and you're just kind of spin doctoring a story so it's not just chaos out there. Right. But it could be the self is something like that, something like a narrative storyteller that coordinates all the impulses that come into your brain and your thoughts that you have into some coherent story that isn't really real. That's the argument. That was the equivalent of me asking you, Dr. Shermer, who am I? Yeah. Who am I? Yeah. It feels like there is someone, and this is probably the worst way to characterize it possible, but it feels like there is someone behind my eyes viewing reality. I mean, would that be a fair description? Yeah. That's absolutely, and it's true. Now, of course, it's a species-specific perceptual system that is, the famous story, what's it like to be a bat. The only way to find out would be to, plug in some sonar systems into your sensory apparatus and start pinging objects with sound and so on. Well, you still wouldn't know what it's like to be a bat unless you were actually a bat, in which case you wouldn't be asking the question. So it isn't actually possible to know. But for the most part, I think if you pull back and look at the bigger picture, when you're standing there in front of the mirror, yeah, it is you. There is a you there. Even if it's species specific and it's in reality isn't really real in the sense that every species sees a table or a chair or another person differently than you do. There's still something out there that really exists. We don't want to go so far as to be solipsists and say there is no reality. But on the other hand, it's good to be humble before the universe in that sense that, we have to be cautious about what we believe because it's easy to be fooled. Again, this TED Talk that I just watched yesterday, this Anil Seth, he has really good examples, sort of like I do in my TED Talks, of how optical illusions, he has a really great audio illusion similar to my Stairway to Heaven played backwards thing, where he plays this audio clip, you have no idea what it is. Then he tells you what it says, then he plays it back again and you can hear the words perfectly. And it's like, oh, that's really cool. And that's an example of why we should be humble before the universe, modest in our conclusions, careful not to be too overly confident in our beliefs because it is so easy to be fooled.
The much anticipated preview to the reverse debate that hasn't even come out yet in just a second. Like listening to The Right to Reason? You can also watch it by subscribing to our YouTube channel, The Right to Reason.
Do you want to stay up to date on today's topic? Check out The Right to Reason on Facebook.
Have an opinion? Join the discussion on Twitter at Right to Reason. You know you want to.
Hi everyone, Michael Shermer here. You have a right to reason, and you're listening to Robert Stanley's terrific podcast. Have a good day.
This is Blake Giunta. I'm a Christian apologist, but I am glad you're here because you have the right to reason.
Hey, this is Dave Blair rocking out to you, and you're listening to Right to Reason with Robert Stanley.
I ain't gotta do nothing. I just gotta pick myself up and move on.
All right, here it is, the reverse debate, where I play the role as the Christian apologist, and I go up against famous atheist debater Justin Schreiber.
Now, this notion that from nothing, nothing comes is a kind of causal principle that you're advocating here. But I worry it's a bit too vague, and so let me offer a more precise example that will, I think, make sense of our intuitions, of the sciences, of our real-world experience. So here's the principle. It's metaphysically impossible for a concrete object to come into existence by an efficient cause if it lacks a material cause. So essentially what this is saying is that it's impossible for something to occur or to come into existence if it did not, if the pieces that make it up were not already existing. Essentially that they were just rearranged into whatever new thing. So if you talk about a chair, well, who made the chair? It's not that the chair came into being from nothing. It was crafted out of pre-existing materials, out of wood, out of whatever you make a chair out of, right? So the principle here is that it's metaphysically impossible for a concrete object to come into existence if by an efficient cause if it lacks a material cause. What I'm saying essentially is that ex nihilo creation out of nothing is impossible. All things that come into being out of material stuff, pre-existing material stuff. So I actually want to say that God creating out of nothing is impossible. So I actually think that this argument supports my view, because if theism entails a kind of God creating out of nothing, and that's impossible, well, then that supports atheism.
I absolutely agree with every point you made, and I think that you're making one fatal flaw in the same way that the Bible references if you build your house upon the sand, your house is going to collapse inevitably. We would all accept that. That's obvious. That's common sense. But in the same way, your foundation is flawed, sir. in the sense that you are using laws that were defined for man, in the same way that sin was defined for man, in the same way that morality was defined for man. You're using the physical laws of the universe that were constructed for us so that we could function and use our lives to glorify our Lord and Savior. You're using these laws to try to define the ontological nature of the divine. He didn't define the laws for himself. That wouldn't make sense. And for you to make this claim, you would have to say that God created the laws with which he exists. How could that even be so if he existed eternally?
Right. So here's the problem I see with that kind of answer. When you say that these laws are for humans, these things I'm referring to here, what you're doing is you are implicitly bringing in God in the back door and therefore inserting the existence of God into your premise, which is to beg the question against my argument. What I'm saying is that the causal principles you referred to were vague. I sharpened those down, and now you're wanting to resist the notion of bringing in causal principles. Well, you can't do that. You're the one who first started to talk about causal principles. I just improved the argument for you, and it turns out that once you do improve it, it supports my point.
Would you accept that physics is based on cause and effect?
Yeah. I mean, obviously some of it, yeah.
Okay, well, I would say all of it, but that's fair enough. In that same sense, even with quantum physics, as it were, cause and effect is not just significant, it's a necessary role in how we understand the mathematics with the discussion that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And every cause and every effect is material, right?
Absolutely. But God is not. And therefore, your sense of cause does not play a factor in the eternal. And your sense of effect does not play a factor in the immaterial. And you're forgetting the most important factor here, the spiritual.
Sure, but none of that has any weight toward making any of that true. You're just making claims here.
Justin was awesome in that debate. And a little factoid for you, Kelly Clemenson, you've probably heard him before. He's the moderator in this one, so I'm really looking forward to bringing that to you soon. I really wish I could have shown you more clips from the other shows, but this wraps up the 25th episode, the best of the Right to Reason podcast. We left out so much awesomeness today. I'm just going to give you a quick list. Daryl Ray talking about sexuality. Dr. James Lindsay talking about the penis. Thomas Smith, Phil Ferguson, Seth Andrews, Atheist Nomads, all people you can find in our archives list at therighttoreason.com underneath podcast episodes. Many, many more. Let me see here. Anthony Magnabosco, Andrew Torres, Russell Glasser, Zach Law, Hertzy Hertz, Steve Shives talked about the MythCon thing. Thomas Westbrook, Michael Moore, too many guests to name. Lots of debates. Episcopal rector, pastors, esotericists, creationists, 9/11 truthers. Hey, did you guys know I debated a guy that believes in lizard people? Yeah, I talked to one of those. The audio on it was a little rough, so I never released it. But you know what? I'm gonna make it a Patreon only release. It's hilarious. It'll just be for the patrons. Speaking of patrons, My Humble Assault just joined the team of Right to Reason supporters by going to patreon.com/right. Thank you goes out to My Humble Assault. Music today was brought to you by A Lost State of Mind. Find more of Jason Cameau's incredible sound at aloststateofmind.com. I've had a fantastic time today. Thank you so much for listening for these 25 episodes. I will talk to you next week. But between now and then, keep fighting for your right to reason.